howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my Rothschild niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day peppering America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose a big homes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas to get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bunch of great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. Tonight, talking on this February 12th edition of the show. We are talking about the dispute in the South China Sea over in Asia, and we're more focusing on the Far East today. That's Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Laos, that area in general. And there's a lot to talk about. There's been some recent disputes that's really involved a lot of the countries that are over there. China, Taiwan, the Philippines, Brunei, Indonesia, Vietnam, and the tensions that resulted from it. And we have this now a strong man, Duterte, who is now taking charge of the country in the Philippines. And the Philippines have been a long-time American ally. However, Duterte has talked some very tough rhetoric about the United States and seems to be pretty tired about the European Union and the West in general. But at the same time, continues to allow American exercise to happen in his country. So it's definitely an enigma, Duterte and his whole role in this mess. And at the same time, you have one of Trump's advisors saying that he sees war as inevitable in the South China Sea. That's Steve Bannon who said that. And war with China, is something it's been speculated in the alternative media, the regular media, but the topic is very scary. The Chinese military is so gigantic. The training has definitely come up in recent years. The Chinese population is gigantic, and the amount of able-bodied men that can be used for a military conflict is way above the American population. We'd be heavily outnumbered in any type of conflict with China. And at the same time, they're a country that has aircraft carriers. Their technology is definitely catching up. The Chinese military is no joke. And even entertaining the idea of a war with China is very disastrous. Now, I've had this kind of a different opinion than a lot of people in alternative media about China, is that to me, I find China is not solidly a Russian ally, and I could see that potentially the possibility in the end of China not being on Russia's side in the big war, and even possibly siding with the United States. And I say this because of the corporate ties, that the American corporations and the big ties between the big business in China and the United States. And I've seen that there seems to be these Western European men, they'll be in their government. There's these few Communist Party officials, and I've looked at their names. They got like, names like Warburg and stuff like that. I find it interesting that they allow these foreigners into this, government that's supposed to be, such about Chinese identity, is that they use, in a way, the Chinese government uses a way of nationalism, or is it more of a faux nationalism that they use in order to get the people on their side, along with this faux Marxism, faux communism that they use, which it's not really a socialist type economic system that the Chinese government has, but they still, stick to the idea of the workers' revolution or whatnot. And I guess it's somewhat comparable to maybe the Soviet Union and how they used that for many years. While at the same time, you had this ruling class that appeared to have been doing very well, while you had a lot of the peasants in pretty bad conditions. Talk about the years of Stalin, and China seems to, you have this pretty sizable class of millionaires. You have a pretty sizable middle class in the country, but then you have this gigantic underclass, peasants, people that are doing the real work to make the Chinese machine going. And you feel like in a real worker society, these people wouldn't be at the position they are, but they are at the position they are. China is definitely also is somewhat of an enigma itself, because China has voted before, for example, in a vote with North Korea, they voted in favor for sanctions in North Korea, along with the so-called international community, rather than sticking up for their supposed ally. North Korea is definitely, they definitely don't have a lot of allies, but China's supposed to be one of their allies, and this time China doesn't stick up for them. Is that I'm saying that China, their loyalty doesn't seem to be very solid, and it's whatever may perhaps is best for the Chinese elite at the moment, or should I say the Chinese government. The Chinese Communist Party has been in charge of the country since 1949, and it's definitely changed its identity, I guess, a few times. Especially, going from the time that really was once, is you could say going from the time of Mao to modern times, is that it's went from a hardline, Stalinist type regime that was overtly dictatorial, was a very bad time for the Chinese people, and then they tried to make this modernization and tried to make themselves clean up their image to the world in the 70s and 80s, and Dengism. I know they took some economic reforms. And they kind of went down a different economic model compared to the old Maoist, old-fashioned Soviet way, I guess, of communist economics. But that it's that the workers control the products, but we ultimately get the final say. That's the government, and that's what it seems. That's what happened under Stalin, is that there was forced collectivization. People had was absolutely no say for the workers. And again, is that I have my own views on socialist economics and the economics of the left in general, and I don't see it but as a failed process. But I do heavily critical of what happened in China under Mao and what happened under the Soviet Union under Stalin. Where you had millions of people were murdered, and the economic system just made a elite in that country very rich. The Chinese, it happened there. It happened in the Soviet Union, and it ultimately didn't improve the conditions of the workers significantly compared to, example, from the Tsar's time, Stalin's time. I don't think that the average peasant would have said that his experience changed much, if not gotten worse, under Joseph Stalin, and if Mao Zedong had not gotten worse since the time of the Chiang Shike, which, there's also the claims that he murdered about 4 million people or whatnot. But then again, all these historical facts seem to, it gets all blurred because one side says one thing, another side says the other thing. But I know that Mao, the numbers are at least somewhere 40 million is what some people say. 45 million people were eliminated under Mao Zedong, which would make him the most murderous dictator. So I'm not going to say murderous person, because they ultimately these dictators, these people that appear to be 100% in charge of the country, there's strings pulling them. It's the puppet masters, the Rothschilds, these people at the very top. They're ultimately pulling the strings of these dictators. Like for example, Peña Nieto is not totally in charge of his country. There's the United States, and then ultimately the Rothschilds that are controlling Peña Nieto. That I said on a Facebook post today about how much of a dictator he's acted towards his people, and that he killed 43 people at Ayotzinapa, or disappeared them. But with Mao, I think it's the same thing ultimately in the end. And it's that possible even someone that seems to be so powerful, maybe one of the most powerful men that have ever existed, was ultimately controlled by the people that are the most powerful, or maybe they used to be the most powerful on the planet. Is what made the tides turning. Definitely seems like Vladimir Putin has gotten a lot of influence around the world, and he's starting to shift the tides. And I say Vladimir Putin, when we talk about the resistance in the New World Order, they're probably the most powerful country that are against the New World Order. And Russia as well is they kind of influence, countries like Iran. Some of the smaller countries are against the New World Order. So Vladimir Putin, he's getting a lot of influence. He has a lot of fans around the world. In his influence, he may be the most powerful person on the planet these days. He definitely seems to, I can see all around the world people are starting to look up to him, and they see him as a real leader. It's kind of an inspiration for people around the world. And now people are waking up to the Rothschilds and who the Rothschilds are. It's something that was a long time people didn't even know who they were, and now people are realizing who they are and what kind of crimes they're responsible for. And all these wars that they funded, all these dictators, and all these all the dictators they funded, all the different international crime cartels that are under the ranks, the drug cartels, as well that they're control the media and making it where they're not even known to the average person. You don't see them on Forbes. You see Donald Trump and you see these other names, and you see, people would think right now, for example, they think, well, America is now being controlled by a strongman. There's no way this guy's being pulled by a puppet. Or, there's no puppet master behind Trump is what people think. There is a puppet master behind Trump. It's the Rothschilds. And it's not Vladimir Putin. There's a lot of people are saying that Vladimir Putin is the puppet master behind Trump. Or I also see a lot of people saying right now that Steve Bannon is the puppet master behind Trump. Putin is not. And, again, it's very funny for people to think that Russia would have any interest in rigging our elections, but then to think that Russia would rig the elections for Donald Trump, of all people they could have rigged it for. I'm not saying that any of the candidates that they at the beginning, I don't think they would have rigged it, for example, Bernie Sanders. I don't think they would have rigged it for Chris Christie, obviously not. And they definitely wouldn't have rigged it for Rick Perry. But, maybe they would have found a way to rig it for Ron Paul or something, and do a service to the American people and bring an actual leader to our country. Ron Paul also is against the tensions with Iran. He's against the funding of Al-Qaeda in Syria. Now, Donald Trump seems to be 100% in favor of the Israeli provocation against Iran. And also Donald Trump seems to be not any different with the Syrian rebel issue. The money's still going to the Syrian rebels. The whole Syrian policy is still continuing. And I was actually looking at the Syrian Arab Army Facebook page, which is an unofficial page, you should note. But they have a lot of information about the war. And they said they see no difference right now when there was a Q&A that they had a little bit ago, that they see no difference since the Trump administration has taken charge. So, Trump, if he was actually against the regime change policy in Syria, don't you think that he would have immediately stopped the funding of the Syrian rebels? He didn't. He did not. Donald Trump, again, he's a salesman, and he sold a lot of people on condos, and he's selling a lot of people on the idea that he's anti-establishment. And that's one of the things that he's been running his campaign on, is that I'm anti-establishment. He says that, but then he'll support all these establishment policies, from the spying of Americans to the crushing of whistleblowers. Donald Trump's for all of it. But he says he's anti-establishment, so it must be true. And a lot of people on the internet are saying, "Oh, well, Donald Trump, he didn't really mean that he's actually pro-Israel. It was actually just a ruse for him to get elected." Okay, if you think that it was a ruse for him to get elected, don't you think that he would have been checked out by the people that select the president to find out if he was pro-Israel? I think they would know. And Donald Trump is definitely, from his statements, 100% pro-Israel. I mean, he said one time during the campaign trail, "I'll be neutral," but at least, and then later he says, "I have to at least pretend to be neutral so the Palestinians sign an agreement." And apparently, and he said that like that. It still shows his bias, is that he's going to do this for Israel pretty much. He's going to fake neutrality in order to get a deal done. And another thing, is apparently it happened recently again, is that he said something about that he's going to take somewhat of a neutral stance with Israel, but he still continues to push the Israeli idea of war with Iran. And it's not their idea, but it's definitely been one of the main things they've been pushing, is the war with Iran. And Donald Trump seems to be 100% on board with it. In fact, we're very close to war with Iran. Again, just like in 2015 when the whole crisis in Yemen was happening, started, still going on. But when that started, the tensions with Iran reached a very high level, and it seems like it's hitting a very high level again. And it's starting to get a little bit scary. And a lot of Trump supporters, unfortunately, seem to be like cheering it on. And they think that they see the Ayatollah as a joke or whatnot. Hopefully, what they don't think is that the Iranians are not a formidable army, and that we could take them out in a week or something like that. Because that's not the case. It would be a very long entanglement of American soldiers. American soldiers would be there for years trying to defeat Iran. And the Iranian military, like I said, would be 15 times worse than Iraq. Iraq, with a ragtag military that had very low morale in the military. And another thing that should be noted is that the United States knew what they had because they armed them. The Iraqi military was practically created by the United States, the strengths that they were at that point. Remember that the Iraqi military in the 1980s received help from the United States in order to defeat Iran, while at the same time they did the whole Iran-Contra scandal thing went on, and they were selling our missiles to Iranians at the same time, apparently to make a little bit of cash. It was a very destructive thing, that war. The war killed millions of people. The Iranians, the Iraqis suffered tremendously, but ultimately the United States helped them invade Iran. Iraq were the ones that pushed the war. Saddam Hussein pushed the war. Iran wasn't the one that started it. And to this day, you see that there's an anti-Iran hysteria in the media, and it's been going on for a long time, saying that they're 6 months away from the nuclear weapon. They're going to have the nuclear weapon in 6 months. And they never build the fucking nuclear weapon. Benjamin Netanyahu has been one of the people that's been pushing that for a long time. And now you see this push in the South China Sea, and that's scary, is that the potential may of a war with China or a war with Russia or whatnot going on in that South China Sea. I think there's a lot of things that could happen. They could also potentially use this May to take out Duterte. But Duterte, I don't see I don't see him 100% as being positive. Or I never even said that. Sounds like my opinion about Duterte is that I don't see him as being 100% anti United States. Is that he's still allowing the drills to happen. I think that Duterte still likes the United States support, and I don't think he's going to flip over and go to the Russian or the Chinese side, like he said he was talking about a while ago. He said he was this stuff earlier, but he never really made good on it. And it's hard to tell what he really means, because he seems to be a giant shit talker, I guess is one way of saying it. He'll say one thing, but then he'll allow the United States drills to happen in this country. I don't know. Another thing about Duterte is that this very controversial drug war that he's in, where he's apparently dealers and addicts alike are apparently being killed. And he's pretty much has like vigilantes go after he allows vigilantes to go after drug users and drug dealers. Now, drug dealers, I mean, a lot of people probably support, I guess, the killing of drug dealers, but to kill drug addicts that have a disease, these people are not criminals. The thing that one of the major things that's wrong with fighting drug war is that when you treat addicts like criminals when they have a disease, and you don't seek medical treatment for these people, but instead you put them into the criminal process. And what happens here in the United States is that you have these jails full with nonviolent drug offenders, a lot of them users, and a lot of times users of marijuana that have not even sick or have disease. They're just using a plant that makes you feel good and is not even addictive. There's almost no harm to marijuana. They say the only thing that I haven't been able to 100% debunk is the claim that they say that under 25 it can cause, apparently like it can it can mess with your brain growth and potentially, aid mental illness for forming. I don't know how true that is. I'm just saying I haven't been able to debunk that one, but most of the myths about marijuana are not true. Complete falsehoods and a lot, sometimes even racist lies that were created by the campaign in order to illegalize hemp many years ago, because it was going to interfere with a few industries. So this man fighting a drug war like that, he seems very reminiscent of how the United States fights a drug war, which is very flawed, as I've mentioned many times, that our drug war has aided the cartels, and it's partially intentional. It's one of the many reasons why they do it that way is to aid the cartels, because the Mexican cartels do business with the United States government. That's no secret at this point. Look at Operation Fast and Furious and how quickly that got hushed up in 2010. It was Eric Holder, Barack Obama were implicated in this. The head of the Department of Justice was implicated in a gun running scheme to the Mexican cartel, which they said something along the lines that, well, this is we're going to track the guns and then we're going to hunt them down, which again seems to be just a convenient excuse for covering up drug or gun running. And the cartel also effectively acts as somewhat like a paramilitary organization for the Mexican government, where they do a lot of the work. For example, like what happened at Ayotzinapa, that was one of the big parts of the big scandal, was that this potential connection between what they were saying is that pretty much the military oversaw a drug cartel kidnapping when those 43 students were disappeared who were protesters against the Mexican government. So it seems very convenient that these people get kidnapped by the cartel when they're protesting the Mexican government. And now you have this story about the Mexican military overseeing this. It just seems like it was definitely, you see the motivation that could be there. And then you have that piece of evidence about the Mexican military might have been there watching it. Ayotzinapa appears to have been a Mexican military drug cartel coordinated kidnapping, and we don't know the fate of the 43 people who were kidnapped then. But Duterte, going back to him, he received he got a lot of attention for his unusual campaign, and during 2016 he kind of ran a campaign. I guess some people even called him like the Filipino Donald Trump for his statements that he really didn't seem to have much of a filter on what he said during his campaign. His electoral run definitely was very unusual, and one of the things though that he advocated was for peace talks with the rebels, the communist rebels that have been inside the Philippines. But now apparently the peace talks are falling apart. The Filipino communist rebels apparently were going to aid his drug war, and I don't know what exactly his I don't know exactly what he planned to do with the communist rebels in the end, or if he was really for a permanent peace. Maybe it was potential some kind of appeasement with China. But Duterte said this, but now that's fallen apart, and now we don't know exactly what's going on. It seems like they're in between right now, between the United States sphere, the Russian Chinese sphere. Which again, the Russian Chinese sphere, it seems questionable because is the Russian Chinese alliance really solid? Russia is a much different country than China. Russia is a democracy. They have elections. They also have a much different culture. Well, Chinese, they are a dictatorship. They're one party state. They censor the media, and they've been accused, of many horrible things, including, the forced abortions or whatnot. Again, you have to question how much of it may potentially propaganda from the West in order to demonize the Chinese government, but there seems to be a lot of evidence for sure that there's a lot of things that of corruption coming out of Beijing, and they've had a history of questionable foreign policy and definitely heavily questionable domestic policy. But their foreign policy, I'll explain one thing. For example, is that ultimately they accepted the meeting with Nixon back in the 70s, way back with the time of Mao Zedong. In my history class, they tried to defend that this is the United States trying to instill distrust on both sides, that they were, that Nixon went to meet with Mao Zedong and he went to meet with Brezhnev. It was kind of just to instill a distrust, and both of them look at each other and be like, oh, well, I don't trust you, you're pro-American. No, I don't trust you, you're pro-American. But I think Nixon was a little bit more than just, some kind of strategic policy in order to try to create distrust between the Russian-Chinese alliance. More was it some kind of business meeting, setting up the future, maybe the Chinese-Russian relations or Chinese-American relations. I think around that same time, the Trilateral Commission came about. It was 1973, right about the time of the Nixon meeting with Mao Zedong and and him meeting with Brezhnev might have been something along the same lines. May potentially those countries working to get, who knows, maybe Nixon, the United States government, they were, getting ready to all work together, stomp out whatever remaining countries were not on board with the master plan. There's, Yugoslavia, some of your Middle Eastern countries, and also 73 was another big year. One of the countries that wasn't on board with the plan, well, all of a sudden, they had a government that was on board with the plan because Allende was eliminated, and they brought about Pinochet in 1973 in Chile. What was significant about Chile was that they were the first South American country to elect a candidate left, of that far left, to their government, to bring about somebody from that point to the left to their government. That was pretty much unprecedented. And this is in a time of far-right dictatorships, military juntas. 70s and 80s was a very bad time for South America. And there was that one bright spot was Allende, coming about to be president, but his time was so short-lived. Allende was only there 3 years or so, and then the coup happened on September 11th, 1973. So September 11th is a much different meaning than it has in the United States, which September 11th here in the United States is the, of course, is the 9/11. But 9/11, to a lot of Americans means the day that supposedly we were attacked by terrorists. But we were attacked by terrorists, all right. That part is correct. But what most people in the alternative media know is that it was an inside job. Buildings don't fall that way without explosions, controlled demolition, And, this is not just any, such a random conspiracy theorist came up with on the internet. Look at there's an interview with firefighters talk about what they saw. And this is pretty much what they're saying. They saw controlled demolitions. And I remember one firefighter saying that any of these fucking buildings can blow up next. And I don't know if that was after World Trade Center 7 came down or if it was after the first two came down. but these firefighters obviously saw something different than what the media was saying, and a lot of people, the eyewitnesses, had much different accounts of what happened. As well, of course, the jet fuel argument that jet fuel can't melt steel beams, and it's a simple scientific fact. There might be some guy on Facebook that shows me a video of how he was able to melt steel with jet fuel. Of course, I think the guy failed, didn't he? I don't know. Again, it's simple science. You would have to burn at something like a minimum of 1,800 degrees. 1,800 degrees is a very hot fire. And, the fire that was seen at the World Trade Center didn't look very hot. I mean, by the color. But that's just a little bit of a personal take from what was going on there. What I also find very, alarming is that, come on, BBC, they're talking about how World Trade Center 7 had fallen down. It hadn't even fallen down yet. It was like 4:30. It's like they got the news a little bit too early or something like that. Went on TV and said it, and then realized later, oh shit, we weren't supposed to broadcast that. The Philippines, going back to my main topic, the Philippines is definitely now that they have this leader Duterte that's a longtime American ally, now a strong man that's that seems to almost call his own shots, known for his very strong rhetoric, and now it's talk about going to Russia or the Chinese. I think that a lot of the Filipino people are sick of the policies of the United States, and it's almost made the Philippines almost kind of like a failed state. Maybe not a failed state, but it's been, I guess you could say, a failed state because it's had such a lot of turmoil. The Philippines has not been really a bastion of stability, nor has it been a bastion of very high standard of living. And the Philippines definitely hasn't been on the same kind of economic growth, for example, like some of their other Asian countries over in the Far East. I mean, we've had in the past, we had Japan was doing pretty well. South Korea is doing pretty well. And I'm not talking about the people as a whole. I'm just saying about the economy. Probably this is more just what the industries, how the industries are doing. China, of course, has had their giant. I guess you could say it's an economic bubble. Maybe it's bound to fail at some point, but they're having their economic uptimes, economic boom. Vietnam doing pretty well, and you even have like countries like, of course, Singapore, Malaysia is doing decent. Malaysia's talking about going to BRICS, and they've been talking about this, and this is odd that MH370 disappeared the way it did, when this was all going on, one of their airliners and another one gets shot down over Ukrainian Air Force, Ukrainian airspace, way far away over there in Europe. MH370, by the way, has been missing for almost 3 years now, if you can believe it or not. And no one it just seems to be an enigma that they can't, the media, all these intelligence agencies don't seem to have any answers to a plane being lost. But yet they talk about how their satellites can read a newspaper from space. Obviously, something seems a little fishy, of course, the MH370 story. And there was a man that was one of the first interviews with the media that said us along the lines is that it went to Diego Garcia Air Force Base, and you heard like nothing more about that. I think it's very possible they could have took it to Diego Garcia Air Force Base, and I don't know what they did with the passengers. But to disappear the plane and to kind of a slap at Malaysia for considering joining BRICS, which has made one of the biggest challenges to the IMF, World Bank, and to the bankers in general, is this organization, which is more about solidarity rather than the consolidation and the loss of nationalism inside the countries that are in this whole Western banking sphere. The BRICS respect sovereignty, and they also do not participate in this in usury like the bankers of the West do, by putting interest rates that are meant to keep people in perpetual debt. This is something that BRICS is more focusing on being away from. They're focusing on a mutual economic friendship between these countries. And right now, again, the whole BRICS seems to be on the fritz in the first place, because BRICS is shaky. The political differences inside the countries is significant. Between Brazil now with a right-wing dictatorship that came about via a political coup, and at the same time is pro-United States and I'm pretty sure it's pro-Israel. And then Russia, you got Russia, and how many times I've talked about them, and then Putin, the Democrat country, they're anti-Zionist, and right now you see how they're at odds with the United States at this point. India is pro-United States, and they kind of have like a, I guess you could say almost like a religious fundamentalist dictatorship under the president they have now, which, you know, it's pretty much it's dominated by Hinduism. Is that they pretty much that are political putting not, they don't have a separation of church and state, and obviously now Hinduism has been combined into the government, and they're imposing that on their population. And apparently there's a lot of reports about the Muslim population just not being treated well inside of India. And that's Prime Minister Modi actually is the man that leads India. You got China, of course, it's hard to even pin down exactly what are the politics of China, but you could say it is a restrictive totalitarian state. But at the same time, again, you have to wonder how much of it is Western propaganda about the Chinese state, but there definitely is a lot of evidence, and I think so, that there's the domestic policy is definitely not good inside China. And last of all, South Africa, which is kind of like I guess you could say a soft pan-African government with Jacob Zuma, is that at times I think he stuck up for Mugabe, and other times he doesn't. Which Mugabe would be, you know, he's the African, he's a pan-Africanist leader. He's also against Western influence inside of Africa, while the ANC is kind of moderated in recent years and has moved away from some of the more socialist aspects of the party, and I think also some of the more strong African nationalist aspects of the party. It just kind of became almost like a European social democratic party, I guess is one way of talking about the African National Congress. Zuma succeeded Mandela, who was the first leader after apartheid in South Africa. And I don't know what exactly their stance on Israel is, because, you know, Israel had a long time alliance with the apartheid state of South Africa. You know, before the apartheid government was gotten rid of, one of their closest allies was Israel. Also, it's said that the Israelis helped the South Africans develop the nuclear weapons program that they had. Yes, at one point, South Africa had nuclear weapons. They claimed they have gotten rid of the nuclear weapons. But yes, at one point they actually did have them. But again, you can see there's massive political differences inside of BRICS, and at this point, it's hard to say what's going to happen. Michael Temer of Brazil, you know, he's only been there for a short time. That was signed under Rousseff, and also India was under a different leadership prior to the when BRICS was actually signed. Modi wasn't there. Modi's only been there since May of 2014. BRICS came about a little bit earlier. President before him, or Prime Minister, I should say, was Manmohan Singh. I think I pronounced that right. Let me try that again. Manmohan Singh. I feel like I'm probably not pronouncing it. Manmohan Singh, who he was the leader for about 10 years there, and he was been there. You know, he led a lot of, I guess, a lot of the post 9/11 years. You know, one thing about India is that they're a major country I mean, a gigantic country that, but at the same time, they're of a different. They're not predominantly Muslim. They're not predominantly Christian. Uh, in recent years, I know that Modi has kind of pushed the people, I think, towards a pro-Israeli stand. The people of India, a lot of them are very, there's more of an Islamophobic element inside the country, unfortunately. And that's partially because of the territorial split between Pakistan and Bangladesh. That's one of the major events that caused a lot of anger amongst the Indian people against Muslims. I think they felt like they were supposed to control that country or whatnot, or they, and also there's you see the ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan, and Pakistan's no good either. They're controlled by a pro-American leadership, if you can call it leadership, that's very tight on their on dissent and whatnot. I don't think it's at one point it pretty much was like an overtly fascist dictatorship, but that's when the United States actually gave them nuclear weapons back around the 1960s. India and Pakistan have been at odds with each other for a long time, and it's kind of like one of those tensions that you don't hear too much about, I guess, because of it kind of gets overshadowed by the Russian United States Cold War, the United States Chinese tension, the United States Iranian tension, Israel Iranian tensions, a lot of other I guess crises around the world kind of take a little bit of a stance or a little bit of a priority over the Indian-Pakistan tensions. And there's also part of the disputes over this piece of area called Kashmir. Also, the song by Led Zeppelin plays dun 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 dun. Apparently, I think he was talking about a different Kashmir. I think he was talking. It's in Morocco, but I thought they were talking about this Kashmir, and they even have like the Arabic sounding music, even though Kashmir is not Arabic, but it seemed like it matched with that. In the Kashmir territory, though, is one of the things that it seems like it's they're definitely very unfortunate for the people that live there, and India claims the entire thing, and they administer approximately 43% of it, but the Indian Kashmir or the Indian Pakistani or the Indian Kashmir situation, it's unfortunate for the people. It's like one of those things like Ukraine or Syria that seems to get less attention than some of the other, for example, every time that you hear every time some kind of terrorist attack happens in a Western European country, everyone starts thinking the profile pictures to Spanish flag or the Italian flag or whatnot, whatever country is hit by a terror attack. But when you have this ongoing terror happening in these places, inside of Syria, inside of Ukraine, also another forgotten one is the one in Burma and the situation there with their Muslim population. You also have the Nagorno-Karabakh or whatever, however you pronounce that, the place that it's a disputed area between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which I think it's like ethnic Armenians that live inside of Azerbaijan. The ongoing tensions there. And also Turkey supports Azerbaijan, I believe, in that little dispute there. And, apparently it's cooled off for a while, this whole Kashmir situation. But still, it's claimed by the Indian government, but the people of Kashmir I believe are predominantly, I think the people of Kashmir are predominantly Muslims, the thing. and the Indian government has a different stance on Muslims than a lot of they're not very than what you would consider a democratic country would have. You think that they would allow people of all faiths to live equally in their country, but I don't think Muslims get the same treatment inside of India. Of course, they have their whole caste system inside of India, the untouchables, and whatnot. India seems to definitely their whole culture. A lot of things are very backwards, I guess you could say about some of the modern, how Indian culture is today. I'm not shitting on their culture. I'm just saying that definitely it seems like the way society sets up is not right. So another thing that, one of the reasons why they're not going to rise to economic powerhouse status is because their infrastructure is bad. Their infrastructure is very old, and they might have 1 billion people, they might have a giant economy, but they don't have the kind of infrastructure to move into a modern existence to the level of perhaps some of the countries over in the Far East. They're doing very well right now. Even Vietnam has moved way more into modern times. Vietnam that just 20-something years ago was a country that was backwards and was still reeling from the effects of from a war with the United States. It took about 20 years for the people of Vietnam to recover, and it seemed like the recovery was definitely really in the 2000s is when things started changing. The people started to experience a country with a burgeoning economy, and I think at one point they had like GDP growth of like 10% a year, which the GDP is not a great indicator for the average person's standard of living going up. But GDP does, it could be an effective indicator in some aspects, I guess. And all it is gross domestic product. As you can see, it seems like it's kind of a vague statistic because it's comparable, or it's like what are you producing? What is is your product really of value, or what does it do for the economy and what does it do for the people? And then, for example, America has a very high GDP, but the people are definitely not feeling that. We have 50% of our people are in poverty. You have 80% are paycheck away from being homeless. And another thing about it, in the United States in recent years, is a very shocking statistic that I've said quite a few times, but it's a very important one. Since 1996, the amount of people living on $2 a day or less has quadrupled, which that's pretty much homeless people. We have a serious problem with homelessness in this country, and now we have also a very big problem with opioid addictions that have led to a lot of people being homeless. Heroin on the streets of Portland, the streets of Seattle, and just all across this country. Apparently in Louisville the other day they had like 50,000 people overdosed from heroin. Or actually, I think some of them were also the very dangerous drug fentanyl, which, all these opioids that are out now. And again, what fuels the opioid epidemic here in this country? The war in Afghanistan. And people that are probably just tuning in now, they're probably saying, how the hell is that happening? Because since the United States invaded Afghanistan, opium production has went up 5,000%, which if you need a little help taking off the zeros, it's 50 times. 50 times more opium is getting pumped out of Afghanistan now, which has caused a lot more heroin reaching the streets of Europe, a lot more heroin ending up in the United States. Another thing is that now a lot of people that used to have or had the problem with the pain pills, well, now the pain pills are no longer available. What they do, they switch to heroin. And a lot of times the heroin, they don't even know what the hell is in it. And you have these bad batches. You have this, they don't know if it's partial or pure or whatnot. And it causes a lot of overdoses. And you have EMTs or whatnot. I guess they're overwhelmed. It's crazy. All of a sudden, we have this huge problem with a drug that for a lot of years, I guess that maybe wasn't known, or I don't. We didn't have this type of problem here in the United States not long ago. It was another place that opium comes from. Going back to the main topic of the show, Vietnam, and back in the 70s, the United States government was involved with trafficking opium to the United States, and it was done in a very dark manner. Is that they put in these caskets, there were supposedly was American soldiers in them, but there was no American soldiers in the caskets. Opium was in the caskets. So that's how they bring it back home. And I say bring it back home. The people involved was that level of, people involved with drug trafficking in the United States government. There is no home for the people in the United States government. These elites, these people, their home is wherever they can make the most. They don't have a home. They just go from country to country, getting money, whatever rackets they can possible. And war being one of their biggest rackets. And combined it was the drug trafficking racket. As seen during the Vietnam War, that's what happened. It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. The United States government has been involved in drug trafficking. They've ended up killing how many people via probably all the overdoses, also all the things it does to families and whatnot. Is that people get addicted and they do horrible things, and unfortunately, you have people, they turn into different people and they get addicted. Is that they end up doing whatever they can to get the drugs, and you have people turn into armed robbers. These people that were normal civilians before they got addicted, and it only takes one time, and with the pain pills that they were prescribed by doctors, oftentimes for back pains and whatnot, and they end up getting addicted to heroin, and very tragic. And the United States government also, you have freaking CIA planes crashing with cocaine on board, and people don't even, they're like, oh, that's just coincidence. They say they've confiscated from someone. The CIA is involved in drug trafficking. The United States government in general, most of the drug trade around the world ultimately goes back to the United States government and goes back to the the elites, and that's the thing, is that best way to combat drug cartels is to legalize marijuana, which is, they make a lot of money off marijuana. And I see some of the tactics, some of the ways they bring it into across the border, and they put in gas tanks and stuff like that. So there's definitely probably not the best. Some of the exposure to that some of the plants have been when they when they cross the border. That the marijuana has been when it crosses the border. It's probably it's definitely not beneficial to the people who later use it. If compared, if we just legalized it all across the country, then it can be regulated how it's grown. It can be grown in a safe environment, and at the same time, it can we can use the profits off of it for social programs or whatnot. Compared to have the buds getting trafficked across the border in gas tanks and whatnot, so people are smoking gas tank weed. They could be smoking, good, farm-grown California, but all legal. And those people, the growers, would not have to face repercussions anymore, and also all this hassle that they put the people in the legal states. For example, they can't put their money in bank accounts because according to the federal government, marijuana is illegal. There's a lot of problems caused by the federal legalization of marijuana, and on top of that, decriminalizing all the other drugs and no longer treating addicts as criminals. So we would have to decriminalize, you know, all the other drugs, not legalize it, but definitely stop treating addicts as criminals. And what we see, in the Philippines apparently is that I don't know how true it is that Duterte is killing addicts. Not if it is true, it's just a symptom, isn't it, of the United States drug war. And it wouldn't be something new. That's the thing, is the media almost tries to act like it's something new. Just Duterte's taken the United States drug war and took it to a new level. It's an ignorant policy, and it's a policy of failure. And it's a failure to properly allocate your government services in order to help the people afflicted by drug addiction, afflicted by these problems, but instead you just eliminate them and do this horribly inhumane policy because you think this is a solution. I don't think he thinks he can't. He can't think this is a solution. He just knows that people will see this as a solution. I know Duterte has incredible popularity right now, but I think he's kind of backtracked on some of his statements. He said, "Well, I'm not really killing users. I'm killing just the dealers, and I'm just killing the pushers." I question, because I see, for example, I just typed in Duterte killing drug users. The New York Times, the first one, the first hit that comes up. Third hit, The Guardian. Western Media. Fourth hit, The Guardian. Fifth hit, The Notorious Sun, which is a very notorious British sensationalist media bullshit channel. Okay, I think it's the 8th hits, The Washington Post. 9th hits, The Washington Post. Reuters 10th hit. So what was it, like 7 of the top hits were all Western media. 11th hit, the Chicago Tribune. 12th hit, oh my god, Al Jazeera. So I wasn't reading these headlines. Maybe some of these headlines might have been might have been pro Duterte. And look at what CNN said. Philippines president likens himself to Hitler. That's the headline. And I know what that came from, is that there was apparently Hitler said that, or I mean, not Hitler said, Duterte said that Hitler killed 3 million Jews. I want to be like Hitler with the drug users and something like that. So, and that's how Duterte, again, he says a lot of stuff, and his actions seem to be kind of different than what he says. For example, his rhetoric when it comes to his alliance with China and Russia, which, again, he allowed the United States to do military exercises there. So I do question how loyal he is to China and Russia. And then I looked up the Duterte likens himself to Hitler, and CNN, Huffington Post, Telegraph. Okay, here's one. The South China Morning Post, which I don't know. I think that's mainstream media, but we'll just click on to see what exactly is happening there. This is what it says. This is from the article. It was October 1st, 2016. Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte appeared to liken himself to Nazi leader Adolf Hitler on Friday and said he would be happy to exterminate 3 million drug users and peddlers in the country. His comments triggered shock and anger amongst Jewish groups in the United States, which will add pressure on the United States government to take a tougher line with the Philippines president. Duterte recently insulted Barack Obama in a series of remarks. He has undermined the previously close relationship between Manila and Washington. Sorry about that. I don't know when I dropped off. I just realized I was dropped. I've been dropped off, but I'm back, everyone. Let me look. I know what I was talking about. I don't know what part I dropped off at when I was talking about the Duterte Hitler comments or whatnot, or when I was talking about the Vietnam and the TPP being on the hiatus. Now Vietnam is going to move toward the Russian alliance, and Vietnam is, I was saying that for a while they were leaning towards the United States because they said that they wanted protection from China. China bombed them in 1979, so it's been like this long-standing rivalry, and it was one of many conflicts that Vietnam faced. But from 1945 to 1985, and actually, there was a little bit before. World War II they were involved in. They were involved in the, of course, the first Vietnam War, which would have been the French in the French in Vietnam. Well, it was actually part of the same war, but the United States is considered. When the United States got into that war, the French tossed the baton to the United States. And the United States fought Vietnam. Then afterwards, the war with Cambodia and Khmer Rouge, where they were against Khmer Rouge. That's something that probably you would know from your textbooks, is that the Vietnam government was partially responsible for the Khmer Rouge, one of the most murderous dictatorships in history. They were a splinter cell of the Khmer Rouge, of the Cambodian Socialist Party. They were not, people think that is the same thing, like Vietnam and the Khmer Rouge were aligned, but they were not. And it was kind of like something that Mao and Nixon worked together to make the Khmer Rouge regime possible. Khmer Rouge didn't just happen from popular support. They were a small ultra-nationalist part of the Socialist Party, and they weren't even really socialist, ultra-nationalist, and I would say ultra-faux-nationalist that took over the country. And during his, a 2-year reign, he killed 2 million Cambodians out of like the 7 million Cambodian population. He ended up killing over a quarter of the population. That's more than 1 in 4 people dead that were killed in Cambodia, and they were killed for small stuff that they had glasses. They assumed they were intellectual, so they were killed. It was one of the most murderous regimes in history, and Mao and Nixon, they worked together to bring that about. And of course, the bankers were the ones that ultimately pulled the strings. And Pol Pot wasn't eliminated in the 70s. Pol Pot lived all the way up to the 90s. People weren't able to get to him, and the Pol Pot was on the run all the way to that point, and he killed himself in 1998. He wasn't even captured. There was talk that he was going to be captured, but he killed himself before, I guess, that would have been able to happen. Pol Pot was definitely one of the most dictatorial, nefarious individuals in the history of the world. 2 million people killed by this man very rapidly. I'm looking up the article where they talk about the collaboration. I read the Foreign Policy article, or was it Foreign Policy? No, Third World Traveler. Foreign Policy is like a mainstream media outlet. The Third World Traveler, they talk about some pretty, like alternative media topics, and I think they mentioned about the Mao Nixon collaboration to bring about Pol Pot and bring about his regime. A lot of times, Pol Pot is brought about to discredit socialists as a whole, saying that that made the worst dictator in history was a socialist. But he was ultimately, what you could say about him is that he was a fascist, really, by what he what kind of ideology the party belonged to a faux nationalist type totalitarian thing, that sounds like fascism. And there was not really much socialist elements implemented into the experiment. Pol Pot was and I would say experiment, but it's definitely happened before. And what that is, it's kind of similar to what, maybe Mussolini or something like that, I guess, is that they employ faux nationalism. They get people behind a government that could do some of the most horrible things. But Pol Pot was a fascist, and they often say that he's credited the socialist. And the same thing goes with, Mao Zedong. He belonged to the very distorted version of, it was ultimately the Stalinist, and Stalinism is just an authoritative state of control, and there's not really much about the workers having control about what they produce, because ultimately the state takes it, which, the state, instead of whatever corporations that, exploit the fruits of the labor of the working class and the workers. And people will say, well, the corporations, give you this and this and this in your pay or whatnot, but they give you a pay that they can barely live on, while at the same time they make billions of dollars of profits, and also at the same time those corporations work with the government in order to rig the economy for their favor. The United States is often misattributed as a capitalist country, which I'm not the biggest fan of capitalism, but I'll tell you that the United States is not a capitalist country, because capitalism is, when you talk about laissez-faire economics, it's not a free for all. It's rigged economics. It's corporatism, and that's the economics of fascism. When the corporations work together in order to crush the competitors. That is what type of economics we have here in the United States. And the United States has this type of economics, and it's not. Mussolini was the one that was really, he's the one that coined the term fascism. And he said that fascism is a merger of corporate and state power. And talk about fascism. That same system afflicted the Japanese government or the inflicted the Japanese way of life for a long time, and during that time, Japan ended up doing horrible barbaric actions against the Chinese and many people across Asia. And how they, go into this mix I find it odd is that it seems like Shinzo Abe, he said he pretty much gave his full out support for Donald Trump, and he went to the Mar-a-Lago, and it's odd because Shinzo Abe was not long ago talking about his potential of joining an alliance with Russia, and that would have been very interesting to see that the potential between a Tokyo-Moscow alliance, which I would like to see something like that. Russia gain a major military ally that could really help scare off the United States from trying anything. But Japan now seems to be swinging back towards the United States, and people say, well, now the United States and Russia are getting close together, so maybe that they're getting into some kind of triple alliance or whatnot. But you have a lot of Trump's cabinet is anti-Russian. You have a lot of the sanctions still are up there. As far as I'm concerned, there has been no considerable change in the policy with Russia. The sanctions are still there. The United States is still attacking their allies. Syria, one of their closest allies, there seems to be no considerable change happening in the conflict in Syria. The Syrian civil war still seems to be going on at the same level as before. and the rebels are still gaining support. Or they still have the same amount of support as before. It's bad. And if they really wanted to work with Russia, then they probably would have taken up a more softer stance from their allies. But now they got almost to the point of war with Iran, one of their biggest allies. And at the same time, you see Trump talking tough on Cuba, Venezuela, some more allies. And going back to that, finally, we were saying about Syria. Going back to that Q&A, we'll talk about what the people from the Syrian Arab Army, it's an unofficial page, where they said that there's been no considerable change since the Trump administration took power back on January 20th. So now it's actually been a few weeks, and there hasn't been, I guess, a considerable change. In fact, we just passed the 3-week mark, right? Because we've been today's the 12th. So, yeah, we passed the 3-week mark of the Trump presidency, and you see that now high tension with Iran, the Chinese situation. Definitely very interesting, but people saying that he's anti-establishment, their argument hasn't been exactly validated yet. And I see a lot of people that for a long time talked about how our politics are rigged, how the New World Order runs the election, are now standing behind Trump. And they don't see the very big ruse that Donald Trump is. Donald Trump, to me, is no different than Obama, Bush, or any other the presidents all the way back to LBJ. And then, there was the exception of JFK. And before JFK, Eisenhower back to Woodrow Wilson. JFK, tried to end the Federal Reserve, and you see what happened. And then people say, well, Trump said he's going to audit the Federal Reserve or whatnot. And if it is true, it is slightly impressive. But I think it's been brought about in the government before. Auditing's not going to, how legitimate will the audit be, is my question. Is it going to be a legitimate audit, or, ultimately the Federal Reserve, controls the government, so it would be like, we investigated ourselves and we found out that nothing's wrong. The audit, I don't think, is going to do much. Ending the Fed's the answer. And, it's like what Ron Paul said for years and years, but people said he was nuts. It's like, oh, yeah, the ending the Fed is not going to, we can't do that. We'll go into economic recession or something like that. They caused the fucking economic recession, depression and stuff, the Federal Reserve. And people are sick of the Federal Reserve, people that know what the Federal Reserve actually is. And a lot of people are completely oblivious to the Federal Reserve. And it's right there in your dollar. People that right now, don't know anything about the Federal Reserve, look at your dollar. It says there, and now you look and think about that. What is the Federal Reserve? It's a private bank that prints money, charges your government for, or I don't know if you say they're not representing the people. And charge the government for the printing of the currency. Then they pass the bill to you via the IRS, and that's where you're paying your taxes. So when you pay taxes, it goes back to the Federal Reserve, a private bank. Believe it, look it up. It's fucking private. There's nothing federal about it. It's in Washington D.C. I guess you could say that. It's as federal as Federal Express. I think there's a T-shirt like that. That's I like that. The Fed is a giant lie perpetuated on the American people, and they tell us in history class when we ask about it. I told people, people will be like, "What's the Federal Reserve?" I remember one time in history class telling this one girl about that, and then I gave her like the realistic answer in there. I was like, "Well, this is what they're going to say, and this is the realistic answer." The realistic answer is, but I didn't say it was May. I would say on the radio. I would say on the radio, it's a fucking scam. I'd say gigantic scam where people make money out of, it's not out sitting there. They literally just used whatever it costs to print the dollars, and they charge you. And think about it: is that $1 bill is worth the same as a $100 bill, And before, they even had bigger denominations. So, a $1 bill will be the same as a $1,000 bill. And with those bills being the same value, a $1 bill and a $100 bill being the same value, but they decide. So now it comes to the question, who decides which bill's worth more? They do. And is there any solid reason, why it's not decided another way? And people say, well, when you see the numbers on there, but who made the decision to do that? Another thing is, there is no something that backs the dollar to actual value. If you were to try to find a use for the dollar other than to spend it for goods at a store, what would you find? What use of it would you have? If you spent a $1, spent a $1 bill or a $100 bill, for anything else, try to find anything else, there would be nothing you could use it for. You could set on fire and maybe it was enough of them to make a decent fire, but there's not much use for it. There's no gold you could trade it in for. Like before, you could take it to somewhere and you could get a silver. You get an ounce of silver, I believe, was it when it was backed by silver. What it is backed by, what is the value of the dollar backed by, is by what it's traded in. But again, there's no physical thing that the dollar is backed by, and that tells you that it's a currency, and a currency is, by definition, the value is decided by whoever controls the currency. Very true story. While money is either intrinsic, is a metal of intrinsic value, or a piece of something that is backed by a metal of intrinsic value. So the a currency, the currency is decided by the value of it is decided by whoever controls it, and whatever you see traded in. And it's like, well, you have the petrodollar. That's why it's called that, because that's what's really determining the value. It's messed up, I know. Very messed up. But when you have this, it's better to know the reality than to live in the same matrix. And when you know that the currency is controlled by who its owner is and what's traded in, you got like the term petrodollar. That's what it is. That's how it is. I've seen though, that there's one little film, the American Dream. It's like a little cartoon video that shows the reality of the Federal Reserve. If you ever need, like something made to teach your kids about it, or maybe if you want to teach. That's not really a kid-friendly video though. So may just to teach your friends or whatever, not political, just for something a little entertaining. It's a very simplistic, I guess, approach to it. Walks you in easily. Now with for example, I feel like people that tune into some of these radio programs are probably lost, and it's hard, because I try to put at least as much basics in there every show, even though I've been talking about the same basics every show, because it's reintroduced to the new listeners. For example, if I'm talking about some geopolitical thing, talk about the Iran, talk about the current relations between Iran and Iraq. Well, I got to talk about the Iran-Iraq War, maybe in the 1980s. I got to lay that out, and that's not even a basic thing. That's actually already like something that's kind of a mid-level thing to know about the Iran-Iraq War, and then talk about something more complicated, which is the kind of complicated relationship that the Iran and Iraq has today. Or when we go back to the main topic of the show, is to talk about right now to talk about South Korea, for example, which I haven't really gotten to much, but it's in the topic of the show. Let's talk about South Korea has their government. Currently a leader that is the daughter of a former dictator. But what's a dictatorship that within that dictatorship, that dictator was actually a Japanese fought with the Japanese in World War II. See, so may have allied that. Is that the fact is that ultimately the current leader of South Korea, her father was a former fascist soldier that ended up becoming the dictator of South Korea, and then he was ultimately assassinated. Now she's been in a whole level of trouble. Now I think she's been suspended temporarily to decide whether they're going to have a early election inside of South Korea. I was about to say France. France is also having an election soon. But it's not going to be under the same circumstance, but it's going to be a heavily unpopular leader. He's not resigning, but he's leaving with like one of the lowest popularity ratings of a leader ever in Europe. I mean, the dude has like a 14% popularity rating, François Hollande, and at the same time, he's also France has had a situation with terror attacks and many other things recently that have led to, and I say terror attacks, some people are going to be like, well, those are false flags. And I know that probably, 11, 13, 15 was probably, the one that happened on November 13th, 2015, where like 100,000 people were killed. That was probably a false flag, but where actual people died. But there's been definitely some problems with events of that nature, and François Hollande is leaving with that. Now we have the potential of Marine Le Pen, who could really shake up things in French politics. She might be elected. She's anti-EU, pro-Russia. There's a lot of promising things out of Le Pen. So it's a little bit different situation. I don't know too much about the South Korean election. It's a little bit down the road, so really at this point, it's not the, I guess, highest priority compared to the French election. That's the big news event that's kind of, the alternative media, I think, should start to look towards, because if France elects Le Pen and they leave the EU, that's going to be huge. The EU could start crumbling down with a Le Pen victory. Britain left, or as Britain is leaving, France could be leaving, and who's next? Spain. You could have, Spain could leave, Italy could leave. There's a lot of countries that could leave the European Union in the coming years. Also, Sweden, Finland. The European Union. People are sick of the European Union. The only place that the European Union has some kind of popularity seems to be in some of the Baltic states, where really some of the people's blind hatred for Russia seems to shadow their judgment, and they support the European Union, even though that's 100% against it. There was dictator gives a speech and says you could support policies that are against your interests. He does his little speech about the United States, and show, you say, well, why are you guys so anti-dictators? And he says all these things you could have, all the stuff that the United States has, and the media has done a big role in here in the United States of getting people to support policies that are against their interests. But in East Europe, I think that it's I said partially because they did get the bad end of some of the Soviet era policies when they were under the Soviet Union. Remember, the Baltic states were under that. But how could they forget the atrocities that happened under Nazi Germany? And before people start saying, I was like, oh yeah, well that's Allied propaganda. The Nazis weren't really that bad. They were bad, and ultimately the United States government took in a lot of those horrible men over here to the United States, and they worked in Operation Paperclip. The CIA, I think that was their first operation. Though the United States government brought those Nazis in huge numbers to the United States, and the CIA is practically founded by Nazis. George H.W. Bush was one of the people early on in the CIA. That was another, these are the kind of people that were in the early CIA. Adolf Husinger became and I just brought that up because just showing the malign nature of the CIA back then. Adolf Husinger and also there's a major thing that he was involved in 1963, but I can talk about that later. Adolf Husinger as well was the NATO chief of staff after he had been the Nazi chief of staff. He had the same position he had in Nazi Germany. He got in Washington, D.C., was NATO. I know it's not the United States government, but he's still NATO, which is, very close. And in Washington, D.C. in 1964, just about 2 decades after he had the same position in Nazi Germany. Hitler obviously enjoyed some support from Wall Street. It's no surprise that later on the Nazi regime was treated not really like war criminals, a lot of them, but they were treated, they pretty much just transferred over, came over to the United States government. And as you see in the later years, United States government, the government starts saying more fascist things, is that stuff that 125 years ago would have been unheard of to hear, talking about this is a country that's founded on the First Amendment and also our right to privacy, things that really went out the windows in recent years was the terrorist threat. Is that they say that we have to give up these liberties in order to stay safe from the terrorists. But it reminds me of the Ben Franklin quote: "Is that a country that's willing to give up its liberty for security deserves and will get neither." That's what he said. I don't think the American people deserve what's going on, but they do definitely they definitely need to wake up and smell the toast. So that is what's going on. Is that they've scared you guys into believing that if you give up that we need to give up our liberties for security, or else we're going to be attacked by the scary terrorists from overseas, or as people, and you hear the Islamophobic rhetoric that's coming up, and now it still continues under Donald Trump, and it's been escalated now. We've got people saying that we have to do this Muslim ban to keep out the scary ragheads or something like that. Which, one thing that should be mentioned is that even if your fear of terrorists is the reason for the Muslim ban, look at the countries that the 9/11 terrorists were supposedly from: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon. None of those countries are on the list. And also, Lebanon's huge problem is the pro-Israeli, pro-American elements in the country. I should note that. But Saudi Arabia, is actually a country that looked upon what country had the most on Twitter terrorist sympathizers in their country. It was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia had, or actually, with ISIS sympathy. It came out of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has a major problem with terrorism because, the ideology of terrorism comes out of their country. The clerics that spout this Wahhabist rhetoric is from their country. Wahhabism is a Saudi thing. And also, another thing I want to note is that they don't seem to have much of a problem with terrorism. It doesn't happen in their country, but they export to other countries. And you notice that Saudi Arabia, they don't seem to have this major problem with terror attacks. Israel doesn't have major problems with terror attacks. But who does? Syria, Iraq, Iran. They seem to be uncovering terror cells every now and then. And Iraq, Syria, and Iran kind of have like a triple alliance now. It's odd, definitely, that in the last 2 years, Iraq's been pushed over after a few years haven't been on the 100% pro-American. Now you even had at one point Iraq saying that they are Iraq pretty much saying that they're supporting, that the United States government is supporting ISIS, which is very much true. And there's no way that the ISIS gets to the strengths that they have without support from the United States government. And if the United States government really wanted to annihilate them, they'd be done in 3 days. see what they did to Serbia and over there in Eastern Europe during the time of the war with Yugoslavia, and how many bombs he dropped on them. I mean, I think me and Scott Rickard talked about this. What was that? 2 weeks ago, and the immense effort that they went through to try to eliminate the to try to eliminate the unity between the people of Yugoslavia, and they dropped a ton of bombs on them. People of Yugoslavia suffered tremendously through that, and at that point it was already a splintered nation. I think it already split up somewhat, but then it split up completely in 2003, the remnants of the country. And after that, there was no nation known as Yugoslavia after 2003, which after a country that existed for 85 years, since Yugoslavia was first formed under the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, went from the Kingdom of Yugoslavia to the socialist, went to the socialist Yugoslavia under Tito, and then later a few other leaders, and then it went to the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and then the thing just fell apart in 2003. Now it's Serbia and a few other countries are now what we know. That's what we know as where was I going with that? Those countries are now what we know there. I'm looking at RT right now and seeing the what's going on right now. And RT is kind of taking an interesting stand throughout this whole Russia, Trump supposed, they're getting, what's the best word for it? Detente of relations between the two, but I don't really see any. I don't really see this happen, of course, and they don't really seem to. They're skeptical of Trump, and at times they've even kind of been what seems to be anti-Trump. Compared to Sputnik, Sputnik seems to be more, a little bit more pro-Trump, and Pravda, I think they're more anti-Trump. Pravda's, by the way, they're not quite the same as Sputnik or RT, but Pravda is ran by the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. It's actually a leftover from back then was the Soviet propaganda source for many years, which was named as Pravda. I forget what Pravda actually means in Russian. It means something, and that's what's left over from. Another interesting thing that happened in the news this week was the Yugoslav, Ukrainian commander, or East Ukrainian commander, Gibby was killed. And people say that the East Ukrainians don't have a lot of support. Well, they had a big line for him to say goodbye to him when it was negative 20 Celsius out. And sorry about that. There was a little slight delay there. I was charging my phone. There might have been, the audio might have been coming in bad. We're at 10:36 right now. By the way, if anyone wants to call in, you do have the possibility of doing that. I do have the phone line, 718-717-8296, 718-717-8296. This is Chris J., Voice of Rebellion Radio, Sunday night here at the one and only UCY TV. And if you haven't, I guess I'll do a little bit of time to plug in some of our partners here Voice of Rebellion Radio. If you haven't gotten a chance to check out Fort Bruce, definitely check out Fort Bruce. Great for with Russia and East Europe, and another person or another group I want to. I guess I could do a little plug in of is Global Public Alert Facebook page. Tons of information there. Great source. Over there in Asia, things have definitely gotten hot. Definitely gotten pretty tense. And South Asia, again, the tensions between, I guess you could say, both sides of the world are boiling up. Back, though it was different, of course, during the Cold War, but in the Cold War, which the Soviet Union, like I said, as I think they've probably in the game as well, compared to now Russia, I don't think they're in the game anymore. I think that's why they're being so viciously attacked in the media. They're doing all these things to try to isolate them. They are. And at the same time, attacking their allies. I think they're not part of the New World Order. Russia is a sovereign country, and the people that are in charge of the United States can't handle it. Or not just the United States. People that are in charge of the Western world can't handle it. And I say the West is a political term. I don't really mean it as like Western culture in general, because of course Russia enjoys Western culture as well, but they're not a Western political country, I would say. The West is how I use it is the political sense. Is that the United States is a Western country, but Venezuela is not. They're outside of the UK, France, those countries. And France is about to leave. France might be soon going over to the Russian sphere. Marine Le Pen wins, and she's leading the polls. The people seem to want her. Le Pen, who has been through a lot of controversy because of who her father is. Her father is Jean Le Pen. Jean Le Pen is kind of notorious because the dude, was kind of extreme. And some of the comments that Jean Le Pen was definitely, they were definitely not in the best taste. But Marine Le Pen seems to have repudiated some of the more extremist comments made by her father. I think Marine Le Pen's her own woman, and she does. She's not stuck to some of the old norms of the National Front. National Front is a political party over there. They're nationalist, socially conservative, but economically left wing. Is I guess one way to describe National Front. Some of their critics, they try to say that they're far right, and then all this criticism about her being far right, but they don't say anything about when their governments fund neo-Nazis in Ukraine. For example, you have like British media saying that. When the British government was supportive of the coup in Ukraine, the United States government gave aid to the Ukrainian government, and they're of course you have the media over here, that's going to be critical of Le Pen, while the United States government supports actual neo-Nazis. So avoid it, right sector, they're actual neo-Nazis, but they call Marine Le Pen a neo-Nazi for being a nationalist and loving her country. And I know I'm breaking some of a norm here, for someone. I guess a lot of people would label if you're going to label me, they're going to throw me over. I'll say it. I'm left wing. For me to support someone that a lot of people have said that she's far right. She's not far right, and she's socially conservative, which I don't know if people have heard what I've said before, but I'm definitely not on board with a lot of the social liberal policies. I would say probably I would say if I had to go, I'm definitely at least center social issues. I'd probably say I am socially conservative. But when it comes to the economic issues, to me, the major thing, a lot of the social stuff just falls in line when the economics are right, and when I guess it goes back to the saying is that that a lot of stuff revolves around the economy. But yeah, when the class system and people are no longer being exploited from the people at the very very top, and the big masses are no longer being exploited, a lot of society goes a lot smoother when that happens. And also, yeah, poverty is the root of a lot of social problems, from drug addiction to families not being able to feed themselves, for example, which I guess is what social issue, what that would start to fall into would be one example is like, for example, extreme poverty, can also breed religious extremism, because people are more tempted to be swayed over to, what they see as any solution possible, even if it means, joining some kind of religious extremist group that can come out of poverty. That's like in the Middle East over there in a lot of those countries. That's part of it, of course. So I guess that's my own little personal take. And my take on Le Pen is that I hope she does a good job and wins this election. I hope that nothing, especially after what she said, she's gonna not allow French citizens to be dual Israeli citizens. That's great. I hope that if she wins this election, or I hope she makes it without anything happening to her, or them making up some lie about her, which I don't know what the media could throw at her at this point. But I think that Le Pen is. I really hope she does win. And it's kind of odd, because these people are the so-called European right. They talk and they sound a lot like the old left, and the current European left, or the so-called left, that use the term socialist or whatnot. They sound like the old right, and with their hawkish, warmongering stances about countries like Syria. And at the same time, their stances about Russia. So hard line. It sounds like the old conservatives or whatnot when talk about the war, or the old right wing when talk about with Russia. And these people want to seem to spark a new Cold War and use McCarthy's rhetoric, similar to like the times of Joseph McCarthy, when we had anyone was a communist, it seemed like it, and a lot of people that were not even communists got lumped into communism. And nowadays it's a little bit different, but they are kind of bringing some of that stuff back. And here in the United States, I've seen was MSNBC reporter saying that Russia is a communist country. Russia is not a communist country. Russia is a democratic country and has been a communist country for about 30 years now. Russia is a long time. It's been a long time boogeyman. Back in the days of the Soviet Union, they scared people with the idea of the Cold War. People thought World War III was going to happen with the Soviet Union. It was only inevitable that atomic bombs would be used in a war between the United States and the Soviet Union. Fortunately, it never happened. And hopefully, we can only hope that in China, the Chinese United States tensions don't bubble into anything more. And also there's also between China and Japan that have sparked in recent years. Remember back in 2012, there was like a big ordeal between China and Russia and Japan, and they have these like disputed islands. And at the same time, China, the United States at times had like their little diplomatic relations with China, and at the same time there's alliance with Japan that seems to have gotten shaky, especially now that Japan was sort of entertaining the idea of alliance with Russia. The United States also has there's Taiwan in the mix. Taiwan is a different country than China. China claims that Taiwan is not. Taiwan is part of China, but according to the Taiwanese, it's a different story. And Taiwan also gets mixed into the whole South China Sea mess. But there's a one China policy. That I remember there was a whole thing that Trump got into there was a little controversy. The whole one China policy is pretty much that the United States decides that China to recognize, and that all relations with Taiwan are through China. But Trump apparently did a direct call with Taiwan, which sparked a little bit of controversy. Taiwan also, I know at one point is that Taiwan and Vietnam have kind of forged some relations between the two countries, despite being very different governments. Taiwan, it's kind of, I guess, out of a mutual disliking China. And a little background how Taiwan came to exist is that Taiwan was the government of the Chinese nationalists. When they were kicked out of power, the Chinese nationalists ran to Taiwan, and while the Communist Party took over mainland China. At one point, pretty much the United States kind of just abandoned the Chinese nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek, and his party. And they ended up going to Taiwan, and then pretty much that government's ruled since. They even call it the Republic of China. There's two Chinas, really. There's the People's Republic of China, the Republic of China. They speak, however, mainland China, they speak simplified Chinese, they speak original Chinese in Taiwan. But it is pretty much just like, I guess you could say, traditional China. But I say nationalist, but don't necessarily take that as that they're actual nationalist. And it might be more of a faux nationalism in order to garner the support of people for their little, I guess, almost a monarchy. I don't know. It didn't really seem like a democracy or a republic, where people decide, the lawmakers and whatnot. But I don't think that they had that. Anyways, what good's a parliament when they had one guy calling the shots? Maybe was it a monarchy? It kind of seemed like it. They talk about North Korea being a hereditary monarchy or whatnot, while they ignore ones that the United States supports. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, some of the big ones. Well, we're at 11 minutes left of the show. If anybody wants to call in, that's about your last chance. It's going to be 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296 here at Voice of Rebellion Radio, Sunday night. And this is what we're going to got after this show. We have 2 more shows in February. Then we're going to be going into March. We're going to be going into spring, finally. Already moving along into the year. I'm not going to say too much because that's 2 weeks from now. What I'm thinking about doing this show. There might be a guest on that show coming up, and I'm not going to say any real details about it. I'm just saying that there might be, and what this guy will be doing from between now and then. It will be pretty interesting to be able to talk to him via a radio show, and we can maybe talk a little bit about his experiences on this little adventure that he's going to be involved with. And over there in the far east of Asia, all these places, you also have to remember there's one more country way over there, and that's Russia. And Russia stretches way over there, and they have the Russian Far East over there. Vladivostok is the only really major city over that way. But Russia, could get into the mix backing up when one of these countries. It may the potential the Philippines or China at any potential conflict. That's the nightmare scenario, guys. Is Russia, China, and the United States are all duking out in the same war. And that's the possibility. When you talk about the relations of the South China Sea, it could happen. And that's why it's so important. I think it's very scary when this war's talked about like an inevitability, because it can't happen. If it does happen, millions will die. It's a war between China, United States, Russia, and United States. Any of these would be horrible. And they talk about the war with Iran also. It seems to be getting more and more likely to happening. And people thought, again, it was that all the candidates in this election, they were establishment candidates, whether it was Ben Carson, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Martin O'Malley, all of them were chill. Now we have one of these people in there, and we're in a serious situation. We're getting closer. It said that this year, I said that probably martial law would happen. I still think that. I think that there's a very high chance that by the end of the year we might see martial law. And I think there's also a very high chance that we're going to see the confrontation and at least the entrance of the United States into Syria by the end of the year. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I really hope it doesn't happen. But I say that I think it's more likely than not going to happen this year. And I see with the talk right now, I see with Tillerson, he'll talk shit about Venezuela, and he seems to be come on, it's a massive conflict of interest. The dude's an oil CEO, and he's the Secretary of State. And while he apparently, right now he might be slightly more for opening up relations with Russia, it's going to quickly dissipate. Just remember that the Nazis in the Soviet Union signed the non-aggression pact, and then they ended up going to war together. I know it was a different situation because, again, it was two governments that were playing the game, and here it's one government playing the game, the United States and Russia not playing the game. But it's still comparable, 100%. And things are getting serious there. China and Japan, they've been at war a few times before. They were at war in World War II. I mean, people kind of forget that it was like a direct showdown between Japan and China because China was fighting back against Japan. In fact, 10 million Chinese were killed by the Japanese civilians. Horrible crimes were committed by the Japanese government. Now, I'm not saying the people, but who were responsible was the government that was responsible. And again, the emperor didn't get or I don't even know what happened to most of the Japanese government officials, but I don't think they faced a horrible fate. Like, for example, they threw Slobodan Milosevic in prison, and I don't think there was even much evidence, was there, that he committed these horrible things that they accused him of. The United Nations said that he had done all these horrible human rights abuses over there in Serbia, Yugoslavia, or whatnot. Well, we're about to wrap up the show here, and this is what I saw. I mean, this is hightimes.com, so I don't know the exact legitimacy of the article, but it says President Trump pledges to escalate the war on drugs. Again, massive failure. Why are we continuing? Because as a people, we shouldn't support this. But, of course, I know why the government's doing this. It's profitable for them, their cronies, and that being the drug cartels. It's very profitable for them. Apparently, also, there's been, in other news, there's been some rioting over in Romania, apparently. Over there in, I think the Romanians have I think they have a pro-American government, so it might be it's a trend over there. People in Europe are sick of escalating a war with Russia, and they don't trust the United States anymore. The people they know that the United States are snakes. I talk about the United States government. When I say that they know that these people are, they know that they're snakes, the United States government, and that the United States government are snakes, and they're looking to start a war with Russia, a war with Iran, and Europe doesn't want to be dragged into it. Maybe I guess there's, I don't know, is that, and also I remember something else is that, I don't know how true it was, but Gaddafi said that if he was deposed from power, that Europe would be engulfed with terrorist attacks or something like that. Kind of odd considering this current situation. I don't know if he actually said it. I believe he did say it though, but I don't know. It sounds like something made up. And the way they said it on the media made it seem like that he would be responsible for the terrorist attacks, like he would organize, or that they would organize them in honor of him or something like that. Because of course the media tried to make it seem like he was the one sympathetic with Al Qaeda, not the rebels that were sympathetic with Al Qaeda. They were Al Qaeda. They were all extremists, just like in or I don't know how many of them. Maybe some of them were moderate, but I don't see all of them are extremists. And it was a very similar formula towards regime change they used against Libya that they used against Gaddafi just back in 2011. Not even that much time difference. In fact, they started both of them in the same year. Early 2011 was Gaddafi. March 2011 in Syria. So actually, in just about a month, we're going to reach the 6-year mark. I remember saying the 5-year mark. I was surprised. Now we're almost at the 6-year mark of the Syrian civil war. This horrible, bloody conflict that's been going on now for almost 6 years over there. And, so right up there was like the Russian Civil War and the Chinese Civil War, which that just a little, and the Chinese Civil War is the one that took out the wasn't quite a monarchy, I guess you could say, but Chiang Kai-shek was still a strong man type authoritative leader, replaced it with the horrible man Mao and the Communist Party that took over after that. By the way, we're about to hit the bumper, so...
The point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple. Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is